by way of background as to why I'm standing here talking to you about how to scale your organisation through partnerships. I work for an organisation that's funnily enough called Spark Strategy, not at all related to Erin's wonderful Spark, but there must be something in the name. And what we do is we operate in this world of profit-for-purpose models. What that means is that our core business is working with not-for-profits on their business models to help them find ways to be sustainable other than relying on grant-based funding. So looking at financial sustainability and impact. We also work with corporates to help embed authentic, an authentic social side, taking their CSR to the next level. We work with philanthropists on changing philanthropic behaviour to seed innovation. And then we work with government on scaling effective social interventions. So just by hearing that, you hear the multi-stakeholders, and that means that partnerships is really vital to what we do. Also, just a little note on our team. We have a mixed team. Some are entrepreneurs, some are really large heritage not-for-profits, and others come from the corporate sector in community partnership relationships, which means that we have a really privileged position of being able to have insight into a lot of different perspectives on partnerships with social sector organisations. Just finally, I guess in my own role, aside from being an advisor, I also, as a co-founder, I'm constantly building the business, but I'm also, part of my role is around business development. So acquiring, retaining, on-selling customers, I mean, it really is just all absolutely based on relationships. So there'll be some things about methodologies and others just a little bit of the mongrel tactics that I use that you might take it or leave it, depending on whether that suits your own style. We'll start off with just a little bit of an overview of what are the potential benefits of partnerships in your organisations. And then I wanted to dive into two different types of relationships, which I think will be most relevant to your context. One being the not-for-profit to not-for-profit, and the other being the not-for-profit to corporate. I'll also give a really brief introduction into multi-sector collaboration because that can be incredibly powerful, especially those of you going for system change. And then I think that'll probably be enough of the sort of reflective insight piece. And I'll transition into some more practical steps for how you might start to think about your own partnerships and linking that to your own models if it is growth that you're heading for. I'll also demonstrate how different types of partnerships come into play at different stages in your journey, and just leave it off with a few takeaways and some resources. So now you've got that in mind, you can decide whether to stick with me. All right, partnerships. I'm very aware that in this space, definitions are really important. There are lots of different frameworks on partnerships, really, really great ones. The pragmatist in me is just going to say partnerships for this purpose are collaborations between two or more parties. If you're all sweet with that, I'll just push on from there. But over to you guys, thinking of the position that you're in, starting up your own social ventures, not-for-profit, social business, social enterprise, what do you think are some of the benefits of partnerships? Just feed them through to me. Yeah, innovation, different skills, that's great, cross-learnings. Resources, exactly. That can come in kind, that can come in cash injection. Yes, economies of scale, beautiful. Efficiencies, excellent. A lot of brand halo. It's a really effective thing that especially new organisations can get from more established organisations. What we generally, the way that we categorise it is into two parts. We look at it from your organisation's business model perspective in terms of sustainability elements. I'm sure when Isaac took you through a business model session this morning, looked at the different building blocks, and partnerships are one that can actually really fundamentally change your own business model. But then the other side of it is impact. Massive social impact happens when there is a lot of different minds meeting together, challenging creative conflict, and then being able to disperse and specialise. So they're the two areas, basically the two main benefits of partnerships that I want to focus on today. First of all, I just want to take a little bit of a look at not-for-profit to not-for-profit partnerships. This 2x2, and forgive me, being a consultant, I have one other one of those in there, but this is the first 2x2 I'll hit you with. We produced this when one of our clients asked us to interview all of their partners and find out their perspectives on partnerships. So we did 70 interviews and we supplemented it with a broader community-based online survey. We took the results, we were number crunching them, and we thought, this is a little bit boring, what else? But there are really common themes. And we spent a few sessions going over them and realised actually there are typologies. And there were 4 distinct ones that jumped out. They're a little bit of an overgeneralisation, but I think they're useful in exploring them and highlighting. You can decide which ones you would like to aspire to be. And maybe there's a few indications or warning signs if you see some of the less effective ones that you're heading in that direction and it's time to call it. So just how to read it, along left to right x-axis, we're talking about duration. So this is the length of the partnerships. And y-axis vertically, it's about impact and effectiveness. Let's start with the honeymooners, what we classify as the honeymooners. These are, so obviously short duration, not a lot of impact. What happens here is these partnerships tend to start off with a lot of keen interest. Yeah, great, these people are pretty cool, they're a bit like us, or we could do something, nothing really clear in mind what could happen. And then all of a sudden, oh, this is a bit hard. Actually, if we want to do something, there's a bit of strategic drift in one or more of the organisations. It's not maintained, communication isn't effective, and ultimately the relationship sours pretty quickly. If we move along to still not that much impact but long duration, I would say this is probably the most common type of partnership we've had experience with in the not-for-profit sector. And it's what we call the love-in, and it's the warm and fuzzy one. It's the one where you all feel great, you have multiple meetings, it's fun, it's cool hanging out, but nothing really happens. There's no clear structured agendas, meetings, outcomes, accountability, and people fail often to recognise when it is time to exit. I feel like I'm being a massive downer, so let me just move up a little bit and look at some of those which are a little bit more effective. And I'm going to start with the one-night stands. And what I want to make clear here is one-night stands are not necessarily a bad thing. All it means is it's short, sharp, confined partnerships with a specific intended outcome that doesn't need to continue. So usually this one will happen between a large and a small organisation, and it often involves an injection of funds to deliver upon a single point solution. Organisations can have many one-night stands over time. They just don't need that continuing relationship ongoing. And then finally, in the top right, we have a relationship that goes over a long time and impactful. We nickname it our Brangelina of partnerships, and this is what we categorise as our soulmates. This is when you have 2 organisations that are connected on many levels. So culturally, it's respectful, there are clear objectives with what they want to achieve, effective communication. There's also those extra little elements such as willingness to lend a hand without any formalised arrangements. But these are people who, they might take it to the next level and integrate structurally as well, but they're the high impact partnerships. All right, I'll switch now and I'll spend not as much time, but we just recently brought on, to head up our Sydney office, we brought on a woman who used to be head of sustainability and corporate partnerships at one of the large banks. And the reason that she wanted to come and work with us was a real frustration in being able to match resources with social sector need. And so, of course, she was the one with the money. So she had people knocking on her door day in, day out with the wrong ask. So I just wanted to share a little bit of experience about if you are looking for corporate dollars or other corporate help, what you should be doing. And again, I've got my 2x2, and just if you're looking at it while I'm talking, I'll quickly explain because the axes are different. Along the bottom is business outcomes, and up the top, it relates back to impact again. But really what she found is that she had a lot of not-for-profits coming and being really passionate about their cause, but not able to outline, one, how it aligns to the corporate's mission, strategic objectives, not being able to report on the effectiveness of it, both ROI but also impact, which is a very difficult field. So if you're thinking of these types of relationships, that is definitely something to consider, but also in packaging up this information in a way that's really easy for the corporate to share that both internally and with their market audience as well. Finally, there was also a comment on timeliness too. But if we just have a look here, the corporate not-for-profit landscape is changing dramatically at the moment. It's shifting away from the very old school, hey, whatever cause the MD thought was worthy, then some payroll donations go there. That's sort of your bottom left, your traditional philanthropic relationship. It's becoming more sophisticated where people are trying to align strategic objectives but also skills. I would really recommend not always making you ask a cash ask if you are going to approach a corporate, and think about things like skilled volunteering, emphasis on the skilled there. You can get a lot of your costs, and you can also build a lot of capability within your teams if you aim for some of the sort of social impact style relationships. The business or strategic value is usually related to when it's cash for brand halo, so think of like the Westpac helicopters with ambulance service. But finally, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about shared value. Shared value is sexy at the moment, and it's what corporates are wanting to a lot of corporates are wanting to transform their CR strategies to. Shared value in a nutshell, while it doesn't actually have to involve a partnership, it just means that it's an initiative that delivers both social and business outcomes. About 95% of the time, it involves partnerships. Think of things like Tom's Shoes. Easy to understand, you buy one, give one, and then they partner with big not-for-profits to actually deliver the services here. I would suggest though, although shared value is all the rage at the moment, it's not something that's easy to set up. So you have to prioritise your different partnerships, look at the type of relationships, and decide which ones are appropriate or worthwhile to try and investigate this. Because if you're doing shared value, it's going to involve co-creation workshops, it's going to be participatory design, beneficiary exploration, etc. It is a whole assignment within itself. So if you're trying to do that with every single one of your potential partners, you're probably going to do a disservice to each of the partnerships. Who here has heard of collective impact? A few of you. It's sort of the holy grail of partnerships at the moment. It's been brought to Australia a few years ago, and it's a methodology that's aimed at system change. In essence, it really means cross-sector collaboration, which is coordinated by a backbone organisation. So for example, you pick an issue. It's around an issue rather than being focused on an organisation. So let's take suicide prevention. And what happens is then members from academia, from the social sector, from industry, you might get a Google, the government, they all pull and put in resources, which is then obviously leverage fund pool, but then also you've got cross-sector knowledge as well. And it's about how do we actually solve this issue. Collective impact, it's in its early days, the models are being refined. It's something very difficult to set up. So I would say, while it is a holy grail, if you're a one-man band at the moment, perhaps trying this as your partnership model is a bit, it's a big job. But if you can, as a small organisation, get in on a collective impact gig, it's a really great way to be able to increase your reach, increase your network, and leverage your funds quite effectively. So I don't want to go into too much. There's a wealth of knowledge out there on it. But if it's something that you think, if you're a big dreamer about fixing issues, then check that model out. You're thinking, how do I start to develop? The first step, I would say, is to look and map your own ecosystem. If you have more than one person in your team, do this separately, because you'll each identify different groups and different areas and different sectors which could be possible partners for you, and you can combine them together later. So for example, when we did ours, we went, okay, who is Spark? What are we doing? We have multiple customer groups, but then we also have others. We have other intermediaries that we look at. How can we differentiate from? How can we collaborate with? There is so much to be done. I really urge you to not fall into that trap of they're our competitor. People are really willing to work together, and if you can partner, you can often do more good together. And you just start with the really broad base. Think about different locations. Okay, people like us, but in Queensland. People like us, but in China. And then you might go, okay, well, our beneficiaries. Who else is important to their beneficiaries? Cast your net really wide when you're mapping your ecosystem. Do it over a few different days, because you'll come back to it, and you'll think of extra stakeholders that might somehow be related to your organisation and what you do. The next step then is to actually fill in some organisations or people underneath that. So you'll end up, at the end of the exercise, after going, no, that's a really stupid, irrelevant one, and scrapping some and adding others, with something that looks a little bit like this. The next step is to actually methodically do an engagement plan. The first thing is about prioritising. This is the really tricky bit because this is where it can get a little bit uncomfortable. If you think, what does my organisation need at the moment? And not just who I want to hang out with. Because I find it, when you're thinking about, oh, I want to make my partners, you often find yourself gravitating, I'll just have some coffees with these people first. And they're the people who you already know, who will help out anyway, but they might not be strategically what your organisation is needing at the moment. So keep yourself honest during that stage. And then invoke a little bit of empathy and think, okay, I know what I want from this relationship, but what's my value proposition? What is the problem that I am solving for this potential party? And spend some time until it's really compelling and really authentic, because trying to develop a partnership where it's only one way, it's inevitable to fail. You know, it sours, and your reputation, which is gold, will be tarnished. And then it's time to go, well, how do I get to them? And you might think, yeah, I want to work with World Vision. It's aligned with a thing. I'm going to go for Tim Costello. And it's about having a little bit of a reality check and saying, don't miss that opportunity. Sure, still try and go for that, but think about a pathway of how to get there. So I just have a really simple process that I use sometimes. Basically, it's really important to research your target first. Go on the website, go on any available materials. I don't know how people did business development and partnerships before LinkedIn existed, but basically go down a few little rabbit warrens until you feel that you have enough of an idea, have a little that you're not going to make a fool of yourself if you contact someone and don't know anything about their industry or their organisation. Follow them on social media, try and see if there are any pain points that they're having at the moment that you can engage in on, or any particular interests or topics. Then, if you have a team, speak with your team and say, hey guys, what do you think we could do? What could be the problem we're solving for this organisation? And what do you think is the best way to present that? Then again, good old LinkedIn. Have a look and see if you've got any mutual connections. If you have, the easiest thing to do, or someone who's connected to them, is just shoot an email and say, hey, Sally, I really want to get in touch with Jeff. Look, I've noticed that you're a mutual connection. I'm thinking of talking to him about this. Would you mind just an e-intro? As long as you haven't done something bad to Sally in the past, she's pretty likely to connect you through. And that's all you need, is just that first opening to then send that email, and I might go, hi, Jeff. My name's Felicity. I work at this thing, blah, blah, blah. I'd love a chance to speak with you about this. I'll give you a follow-up call. And then you've already softened it so that when you call, you say, I'm just following up my email. I know this is like really tactical, but I just think it's sometimes if you don't hold yourself to a process, you can feel a little bit lost. And this is just something which I find kind of keeps you going along the way. Then it depends whether or not you're going for something like a shared value or a joint initiative collaboration, or if you're just wanting to get a little bit of funding, how much investment is then spent from then on. You might do co-design workshops. At the moment, we're designing a joint product with the Reach Foundation, and it's aimed at corporates. So we've held a number of workshops with corporate organisations saying, can you help us? Tell us what you need. And we've now ended up with an absolutely stellar offer, which when commercialised is likely to generate a lot of fees for the Reach Foundation. But if we'd just gone and had one coffee and tried to pitch something to them straight away, we wouldn't have understood the nuance of that. So it's about just finding out from the value that you're seeking and the type of relationship, how you're then going to engage with them. And finally, nurturing and monitoring the relationship. Don't be annoying. Don't email every second day. But you might want to keep a reminder in your email that do a media watch, and if something in the industry comes up, you can shoot something through and say, hey, saw this, thought of you, and you just keep top of mind. So this topic was meant to be about how the partnerships achieve scale. We've talked about how to ascertain partnerships and how to maintain them a bit, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a picture of, if you're a startup, how leveraging partnerships can help you grow. So over time, if we start off and we're one or two people, we've just launched our venture, we're so focused on going forward and just getting out our MVP, etc. What type of partnerships do we need? Really, cash is king at that stage. As Jeff mentioned before, the first couple of years, you might not be paying yourself. You probably don't have a lot of that discretionary spending cash, but your business still needs things done. What we did when we launched Spark is we did heaps of in-kind partnerships. So we partnered with a couple of hipsters that did our website, and we did their strategy. It was just one of those things. Yes, they probably got, if you monetize that now, it's not an even thing, but that doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on that. Don't think about necessarily everything having to be fair. Think about what you need right now, because in scale, the first step is actually survival. So the types of partnerships you might be having would be the direct funding relationships, or some of these just more transactional types. The next stage is maybe you've been going for a while and you feel a little bit of stability, but you want to take that next step up and perhaps be able to access that next level of client. And here you might start to have some collaborative partnerships. So for example, you might look at other organisations that are also in a similar field, and you say, hey, I'd love to go in on a joint pitch with you, a joint tender for a piece of work, something like that. And that's where you start to share some cross-knowledge, and you start to understand. For us, it happened with the not-for-profit sector. We started to get a deeper understanding of the nuances of the sector. And that opened it up to us being able to then get clients of a much larger scale, because we could hold our own in those conversations. And we also did a bit of that brand halo of other brands which we partnered with. So as an example, in this middle layer of growth, you could be doing collaborative partnerships. And then finally, if you've got really big dreams from both impact perspective, if we're talking system change, but also size, if you're talking revenue, we're looking at transformational partnerships. And these are the ones such as collective impact models, such as shared value initiatives, which drive great revenue, have great impact, but they require a lot of work. It's almost like starting up other little businesses as well. But if you look at what you can achieve at the top, it's very different with starting out and just being on your own. So just as an illustration of how partnerships can be that vehicle to scale. Pitfalls. This very ugly table here just basically sorts a few of the common mistakes into some different categories. None of it should be that sort of mind-boggling, but I just wanted to mention them as they're still really commonly made. First of all make sure that you have clear objectives about your partnership, you knowing what you want from it, but also your partner knowing what you want from it, and you being clear about that. Then measuring that over time, and then deciding whether or not it is actually worth you continuing the partnership. Custodial and possessive behaviour is something that we unfortunately find in this sector a lot as people trying to sort of own an issue. It is important, yes, to protect your IP to an extent if you believe it should be protected. Otherwise, sharing can be really, really fantastic in partnerships, and not trying to be always just that one organisation known for curing this or curing that. We've seen that's come in the way of a lot of potentially really great partnerships. Taking the time to assess prospective partners, and when we did our partnership survey, there was actually a 50-50 split about the types of methods that people used to assess their potential partners. 50% of them said, yeah, we have a structured approach. You know, we go through business casing, we look at their financials, their legals, our reputational risk. We have decision trees. Are they the only one doing this? Yes, no. Are they, et cetera, et cetera? And the other half said, no, it's an intuitive thing. It's whether or not we connect with the people. It's whether we think that what they do is good. And so I think it's about deciding what is best culturally for your organisation, and perhaps making sure that you have a bit of a balance of both if you tend to err to the extreme of one or the other of those. And operational, thinking beyond funding. Funding is a stress, and we find that it can blind a lot of organisations, especially in early stage, and they focus on funding models. I would suggest us to stop and take a step back and think about business models. Think about the value that you can create together, especially exploding that building block of partnerships, and the funding model will flow from there. Common agendas, accountability I've touched on. Keeping it simple really helps. There's nothing worse than setting up a partnership where then the administrative burden is more than the actual value that you're receiving from the partnership. And then communication. There's not one blanket rule for the best type of communication. It really depends on the level of the stakeholder, their time, and the type of communication. So Sometimes it's best to just pick up the phone. Other times you should just collate your things and send emails, board notes, etc. As an interesting comment that we got from one of the CEOs was just, it was really imperative to not let your team speak badly about your partners. Yeah, partners can be frustrating. Like, they're not you. They will have different ways of doing things. But if you speak badly of them rather than just trying to find solutions with them, as was raised earlier, people move around. They change jobs, they change industries, and it really doesn't take long for your reputation to be tarnished. As an early stage enterprise, you have to have that rock solid if you are going to scale. So just protecting the credibility and the reputation of everybody is always a wise move. And finally, that might just be my pet peeve, but avoiding talkfest. These are just some final thoughts that didn't quite really fit anywhere else. But basically, strategically, if you think about your business, it's always smarter to partner off those things that aren't your core competitive advantage or your core competitive capability. Others can do it better, faster, cheaper, and you can focus more on what you're doing, what you should be doing. So it's also a superior mechanism for achieving social change. You have more minds at work, more skills at work, more resources, etc. But unfortunately, like most things, the Achilles heel, it really is the implementation. So it does help, as laborious as it can be, to follow and manage partnerships as you would do other projects within your organisation. The value from each partnership doesn't have to be equal. And we find this, a lot of our corporate clients say, we can't do that, we can't enter into that relationship. It'll look bad because we're getting more value out of it. And we're like, no, that's actually okay. This other person is getting great value out of it too, much more than if they weren't in partnership with you in the first place. While you have to be careful not to be taken advantage of, sometimes, even if it's not equal, just accept the value that you can get and try and build on that and then take that next step later to get more. Finally, partnerships aren't things in and of themselves. They're actually between people. So it's just remembering that the manner of interaction and also keeping that thing of empathy, always thinking what this means for the other person, what's making them feel, and what aligning the interests, that's really paramount to all the solid partnerships. So I've put some resources up here, and also my details if anybody wants to find out more. But basically, I just hope some of these tips today, help you to have as many one-night stands as you want, find your soulmates, and sort of avoid those post-honeymoon breakups. But if anyone has any questions, happy to answer.
So much for your time today, Felicity.